All right, so welcome everybody. My name is John Reyes with Social Networks, and we are recording this presentation. So you might be watching this live or at some point, maybe even doing a rewatch. So the first thing that we want to do is to thank all of those that have registered and signed up for this class, Mastering the RPA. And I'll tell you that we have two, not just notable real estate agents that operate out of the Southern California market, but real estate agents that have significantly made an impact in our industry on a national level. We have Julio Arias, who has actually traveled with me to Washington, D.C., spoke at an event out there, which was awesome. And then we have Joseph Limo, who has built a company a team that is recognized nationally with a couple hundred agents, which is fantastic. But more importantly, and I'll say this is for me personally, good friends of mine, really good friends of mine, guys that if I have questions in regards to the RPA that I know that I could reach on out to them. Joseph Limo is actually a certified trainer for the California Association of Realtors as well. And Julio, him and his wife, they have a team, J&J Realtors, and his wife is also a certified trainer for the California Association of Realtors specific to the contracts and agreements. So I'm just going to be the host of introducing these guys, letting you know that this training today is being sponsored by Easy Fundings as well. So shout out to the Easy Fundings team. And without further ado, if it's okay with you, I want to give you guys a stage. Go ahead and let people know the breakdown, what you're going to be speaking about. I plan on putting my phone here on mute. And then for all of you, I'm monitoring the chat box on both Facebook as well as on Zoom. So either of you, if any of you have questions, feel free to log them into the system. And at the appropriate time, I will make sure that I bring this on over to both Julio as well as Joseph. And then one more thing, this is a two-part series. We're doing this today as well as tomorrow. So it'll be well worth you making sure that you are on both of these sessions, because let's face it, right now as real estate agents, we need to bring true value to our clients. We need to protect them as best as we can. And we want to make sure that we know what we're speaking about. So without further ado, gentlemen, I'd like to pass it right on over to the two of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's really great to be here. As we dive in, I want to share with all of you guys that I'm honored to be on here with both John and Julio. I have a tremendous level of respect for both of these gentlemen. Julio is a practitioner, he and his wife, that I aspire to be one day. So thank you for sharing the stage with me, my friend. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. And of course, ditto to that. I mean, it's awesome to be in the industry. Every time I say this, I say it like I'm brand new, but I've been in it for 10 years now. And I know, again, there's still so much to learn, and it's awesome to have people like you that I can look up to and at the same time work alongside with and learn from. And then at the same time, do some transactions when we can. And it's awesome. Makes it a whole more beautiful place to work in, right?
Indeed. And one thing I want everyone to be clear about, we're going to dive into a little bit of expectations, but the good news is that this is not going to be like your standard step-by-step, read every line of the contract and tear it apart. This is going to be a little more of a tactical, how we use the contract in effective manners. And then the great part is tomorrow, we're going to really dive into some more specificity on some of the additional addenda that have been added because of the coronavirus, and some more on how we're seeing leverage points and different strategies because of all that's going on. But today should be a lot of fun. And I want to make sure everyone's clear. Julio and I don't do everything exactly the same. And the real fun part is that I think you guys are going to see that we can have differing approaches and yet at the same time have a lot of clarity, understanding, and respect for how each of us do it a little bit different. So, understand that there's no one size fits all. And there are a lot of times that I've learned from Julio in different circumstances how to transition a little bit more to how he does things different in certain cases, because now that's to my benefit. So that's why I'm so excited to always do these in a collaborative manner, because Julio has some amazing approaches, and a lot of them can make a lot of sense for how I want to adapt myself given different circumstances as well.
Yeah, so, I agree with you. And also, the funny thing is we talk about the DISC test a lot in our industry, right? What the person's attitude is like, our clients, and how to reflect that. But I think it's also important that we use that same approach when we're working with other agents, right? Because how many times have you heard an agent say, well, let's not pay attention to the contract. Let's work in this gray area over here, or vice versa, and it really just comes down to experience, and you've kind of got to walk both lines. And so I think it's cool that we're doing this. And again, just an opportunity to share what we use every day. And at the same time, hopefully those agents that are on here that are newer will be, two steps ahead. And then at the same time, those who are on this and who have had years of experience can provide us with some knowledge as well tomorrow. But today, take in what we're hearing and be ready to share their experience for sure.
Yep. And the bottom point I'm gonna make mention of right away. If you don't have an RPA available in your hand right now, try to print one and grab one so you can have it in front of you, take notes all over it, or just have something to take notes with in general. John is going to moderate our chat box. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to chat or type into the chat some clarifying questions. They're more than welcome. If we can get to them in the middle of the conversation and John sees it fit, he'll dive in. Otherwise, it may be something we hold towards the end and kind of re-clarify. We're not going to have like an unmute, let's talk about our war stories with all of this. Although there's time and space for all those things, we want to get through a lot of content today. So we're going to keep that to a minimum, just so everyone's clear. So Julio, if we're good, man, is there any other expectations before we dive in?
No, not at all.
All right, let's do it. All right, so let's get into the fun part here. As you guys know, this is page 1 of the RPA that we're on. Julio kind of filled this out together just so that we can work with something in a specific example. So what we have here is a couple of home buyers buying a property on Utica and Rancho Cucamonga, 529 with a 30-day escrow, and you can see me and Julio have put in, who's representing whom. I'm representing buyer, he's representing seller. Couple of points to make sure right out of the gate that are important. Number 1, fill this part out as best as you can. Make sure that you have a parcel number in. Make sure that, obviously you put it in the names, and you can obviously autofill now with whom is representing whom, but make sure you check the boxes. I still see that very often where there's no boxes checked. And that can be an issue if it's not addressed. And you'll probably have to go through an AC and agency confirmation to clarify who represents whom. I always make sure that all license information is on there. Again, with autofill, that shouldn't be a problem, but it doesn't always bring in all the data that you need. Take the extra minute to go and get the necessary information and plug it in. Julio, I'm sure you would agree, listing agents appreciate that things are done correctly.
Oh, yes, for sure. And especially in this market right now with the multiple offers, you're just giving me reasons to, I know it could be a mistake, but sometimes it's kind of one of those things. If I see mistake after mistake after mistake, I got to assume that there's going to be some of this going on in escrow too. So it all starts off with that first page. I use the MLS, like you said, MLS Direct Connect, and double check everything every time and check every box for sure.
Yep, absolutely. So in our dynamic, it's a purchase price of $529 and a $7,000 earnest money deposit. So we'll get into earnest monies and all that fun stuff. Julio, I know you want to speak to this one because in the previous slide, we go through finance terms and then we get over to D, first loan. But there's a little line right above it, and there's always a mistake between the first loan and the line above.
Yeah. I want to make sure I unmuted myself.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Guys, it's one of those things we see quite a bit, right? Where somebody's putting in the loan amount and they put it in that initial deposit or increased deposit area. And then, I know that as an agent, we should be working with each other. So we should be calling that kind of stuff out. But I actually had an agent one time in my very beginning days who didn't call it out and let it go open escrow. And then when I kind of saw that I had done something wrong, that's when, I had to go in there, do an addendum and try to work things. And, he didn't make it easy for me. He didn't make it easy for me at all. And I couldn't really be upset with it. Now I've learned from that. So definitely that making sure you're putting things in the right place. Again, it's the first page and you can't start making mistakes from here.
Yeah. And obviously you guys understand the ramifications of that. If you put the loan amount in the increased deposit, you're basically saying that your client's going to come with an increased deposit of the full rest of the loan amount. And that's a massive issue. Granted, as Julio said, most listing agents will probably say, hey man, you made a mistake. You may want to fix that. But as Julio mentioned, that's not an obligation of the listing agent. And they could put you into escrow and they could put you over a barrel in that way and really make it difficult for you to not only make the correction, but they might even use it as a leverage point for renegotiation on some items. So yeah, we have to protect our clients, and it's just, I get it. We're out there, we're hustling, we're trying to get things together very quickly. Just make sure you know exactly where things are going and you don't put an amount in the wrong place because it means something dramatically different.
Yeah, definitely.
And then Julio and I also filled this out. We want to make sure that people are clear. Like in first loan, obviously we put the loan amount in there, as you guys can see on the screen. But then furthermore, we put in that this loan shall be at a fixed rate not to exceed 4.5%. And you can put whatever amount in there, and we'll speak to that in a moment. And then it says, regardless of the type of loan, buyers shall pay points not to exceed 1% of the loan amount. Julio, do you want to speak to why we leverage this?
Yeah, essentially what we want to do is kind of put a cap, right? We want to make sure that, God forbid, especially again now with things changing so rapidly, that tomorrow the interest rates just don't go skyrocketing, and our buyers, of course, either can't afford the home at that point, or don't want to buy the home with that high of a rate. So if you don't put anything in these areas, you're basically leaving it open to the opportunity for the listing agent when you try to say, hey, we have to cancel because our loan has changed. You know what's going on in the world. If I'm the listing agent on that one and my seller's in a contingent sale or something like that, and I've got to stick your hand to the fire, I'm going to have to revert back to this and say, well, actually, there was no cap. You're essentially taking whatever loan you can get, and we still got to move forward on this thing. And that'll be a tough position to be in. Of course I got a heart, but at the same time, my job is to protect my client. And so, depending on where we're at in that transaction, it may not save you. So yeah, definitely putting, a point or two or a percentage or two above what your buyers currently getting quoted by the lender. Be careful of the fact that, if something's changing, like how much they're going to be putting down, and puts you into a jumbo loan, things like that. Of course, you still got to get approval on that change, but, again, make sure that you're giving yourself a little bit of space there so that, you've got some room for error, so to speak, or changes in the world.
Yeah, so it's an important thing to leverage because it's there and it's available to us. Usually what I'm doing is I obviously we have a pretty good pulse on where rates are at. So like right now, 4.5 is probably a touch high that I would put in there. I'd probably go a little bit closer to like 4 1/8 or 4%. Even that's kind of high given where rates are at.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to put it right on top of where rates are. Like if they were quoted, let's call a 3.75. I'm not going to put a 3.75 or a 3.875. We need some flexibility, be reasonable.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do, like Julio mentioned, is we're trying not to let our buyers be in a position where rates change dramatically and they have no out of this contract given that fluctuation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. And then of course with the 1 point as well, because, if you don't put in the point, it could be perceived that it could take whatever, they can still get a 4.5% if they put 3 points down. That's why we put not to exceed 1 point of the loan. I hope everyone's clear on that. The reason we put something in there is because even if we put 4.5%, but we did nothing about addressing how many points, it could cost them 4 points to get down there. And that's ridiculous. Well, this puts a limit on how many points to get there as well.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing that most people just blow right past.
Yeah.
So in E, one of the things that we wrote in here, because we see this, still a lot. I mean, this market's obviously adjusting. It's hard to get credit for buyers' closing costs. But in the event that you do, we wanted to just address this is, and I think we agreed on this. This was our preference in where this goes.
Agreed.
When you're asking for closing costs for a buyer in the additional financing terms, does two things. Number one, it's in the appropriate section because it's regarding financing. Number two, you're not going to upset a listing agent by trying to make them feel like you're burying it in the contract. Yes. So here, the way that I traditionally write it is seller agrees to credit a buyer a total of whatever dollar amount towards buyer's recurring and non-recurring closing costs. Julio, anything on that you want to touch on?
I actually will sometimes, if, I will use a number like this if I'm trying to keep it tight, or I'm trying to, if my client really, really needs it, I'm trying to keep the number right at what we need or estimated what we need. But in other times, and many times, I would do a percentage.
Cool.
And this way, depending if the price point changes, anything like that, we've got pretty much most of the closing costs, 2%, 2.5%, maybe even 3% if it's a higher priced home or the buyer's loan type. So yeah, that's definitely an area we agree on, but sometimes percent, sometimes a number. Yeah.
Love it. And then just remember, everyone, this is market specific. I don't know how many people are getting contracts accepted right now by asking for significant amounts of closing costs for their buyer. Yeah. So just remember, the market always dictates.
Go back one slide real quick. I wanted to touch base. One thing that kind of came to my mind as we got our day started was kind of maybe setting some buyer expectations here and there. And so one thing that I would like to share with you guys, because I had this happen to me about a week ago, is in 3A, where we have the type of deposit. Hopefully you know that it's default to be electronic funds, as it says. And again, 3A1, that the buyer's deposit will be directly to escrow by electronic funds. Well, my client, it was my fault. I usually do a pretty good job during buyer consultation time to set expectations, letting them know this is pretty much step one of when we open escrow. He, from his previous experience, said, "Oh, I'll take a check-in." And that escrow company, called me up and said, "Hey, a client just came and dropped off a check." And I said, "Really?" And, had to clear all that up. And they said, "I can't accept this." And reason being is they're the neutral party and they're trying to keep things, neutral, that they didn't want to change the terms of the agreement. So I had to do an addendum for it. So I've had that happen twice in my career. And I just thought I'd share that with you guys. Again, for those of you who are newer, set these expectations with your clients in advance. Let them know electronic transfer is going to be requested. You have these people out there who are like not about transferring electronically. They're very, about their funds and everything like that. So just a heads up, I thought I'd bring that to your attention because as I was going through it again today, I just thought back to that experience the other day and thought I'd share. I make mistakes too. So wanted to be humble on that. So definitely thought I mentioned that.
That's a good one. And even for those of us who've been around for a long time and we're used to getting a copy of a written check, right? If that's still your process, make sure that you've adjusted your process on the RPA to match.
Correct.
So, good one. It's great. All right, let's move on. Now we're going to get into page 2 of the contract. And this is where things get really fun. So we're going to dive into a little bit of the verification of down payment of closing costs. And now we're going to get into some of the loan terms as well. So a lot of us know that when we're submitting an offer, especially in this market, we're trying to make sure that we're putting our buyer's best foot forward and we're providing as much documentation as needed for a seller to really consider that offer. So it's not just the RPA and, the associated documentation. It's also proof of funds. It's also pre-approval letter. Like I really encourage you guys to make sure that you're providing that at the time of offer. Granted, it's defaulted that you have 3 days after acceptance to provide. But if you're going to attach it and make it a part of your offer, as I think is a really important thing to do now, make sure you also check the boxes that it was attached in your offer. Julio, anything on that you want to dive into?
I would just kind of put out there a request of at the same time when you're a listing agent and so the buyer's agent doesn't have a copy of the proof of funds, right? Because for whatever reason, the lender does, but you don't, and you're reading the offers, let's have some email etiquettes because I've had agents come back and like all caps, like tell me off on the fact that I didn't attach the proof of funds. And it's like, hey, really sorry. If I had it, I would have. I did attach the DU, which the lender provided me. This is really good friends. I'm not trying to get too personal with them. I don't have copies of the proof of funds. But if you also notice in the RPA, I didn't check the box. Yep. You know what I mean? Like I want to mention that because I do that with intention sometimes. And, again, guys, if you're on the listing side, just know that sometimes it's not always what you believe in your head or what you've made up. And if I do the contract right, don't be mad at me. Just, maybe perhaps send that email saying, hey, is there any chance you can get, that's how I would word that email now, right? Like, is there any chance you can get the proof of funds before I present, as opposed to like, what the hell? Where's the proof of funds? This isn't complete. Like, no, my offer is complete. Just, I didn't have the proof of funds and I gave you a DU. That was the best I had. So yeah, and definitely.
And there again, Julio, what I love is that you're really making sure like everything is congruent with your offer. If it's attached, it's checked. If it's not, it's unchecked. Mm-hmm. So that really goes to show that things are completely congruent throughout your entire loan submission package. Yeah. So that's awesome. Yeah. Let's dive into a little bit about appraisal contingency and removal, as well as loan contingency and removal. So as you guys know, this thing is kind of pre-plotted that if there's an appraisal contingency on your offer, that it's supposed to be removed within 17 days after acceptance. As far as the loan contingency is concerned, we know that it's kind of predetermined to be 21 days unless adjusted on the contract. Now, some of the reasons why I like to bring this up is a couple of points that I think are really clear. And this speaks a little bit more to how you manage your team, right? Your team being your loan officer in the transaction as well as the buyer. Like, that should be a collaboration. When you're writing offers and you're either leaving it the way it is or making any changes to those timeframes, make sure everyone's crystal clear on what those timeframes are, and that we have to make sure that we're abiding by performing to those timeframes. You know, I see a lot of times where agents or even lenders are trying to rebut when it's time to remove, let's say, a loan contingency. And they're like, well, we don't have clear to close yet. And I have to help them understand, you show me in the contract where it says you need a clear to close to perform according to this deal, because it's not there. What this contract reads is the time frame is the benchmark. You had up to 21 days to make sure you're in a position to know if this loan should come to fruition or not. It doesn't mean you have to have nothing but certainty that it is in fact going to close. There is shared risk in this contract. So Julio, I'll kick it to you if there's anything else in there you want.
And using kind of the same thing on the appraisal, right? If we're talking about day 10 already coming about and we know that the appraisal has been ordered, or if it has, they haven't gone out there, you know, don't wait till day 17 or even 18 till the listing agent calls you and says, hey, where's the appraisal at? If you know it's behind, get an ETA done, get an extension request done. You know, let's have some kind of, you know, again, be on the same team or at least work together here. And if you know something like this is coming up, this is the same, and we'll get to it in inspections, but don't wait till day 17 and not send me anything if I'm on the listing side, you know, and then have me calling you and asking you what's going on. And you know, I obviously know the appraisal hasn't happened. So on the listing side, make sure you guys are reaching out to the buyer's agent. Hey, it's day 10. You know, we haven't even had the appraiser appointment set, because I'm looking for it at that point, knowing that there's only 7 days and it's likely the appraiser is going to take 5 days to get back the report, if that. So keep in mind that, you know, again, these contingencies, these two, and of course, the inspection one are in a situation where the day comes, communicate prior to if you need more time. And at the same time, when the day comes, it doesn't eliminate you from removing that contingency. Again, one of those things is that once you get that appraisal contingency back, you don't have to also, if you're still working on the inspection, wait till that to be done in order to send it in at a good faith. And when you want to show the sellers that you're moving along, you can send in, you know, 3 CRs, contingency removal. So why not send it as they come? You know, it doesn't hurt, especially when everything's fine, right? When we get the perfect scenario, they're appraised at value, no conditions. Hey, let's work together and move it forward.
Definitely. So we'll briefly touch on J5 and then Section K. But then, Julio, after that, let's dive into where we're starting to see some changes because of our market, given the lack of inventory. So just so you guys know, J5 basically reads that there are possible limits on how many credits a buyer can receive from a lot of different parties, okay? And the reason why that's in here and that it's important is because essentially, if the seller agrees to some credits to the buyer, but the buyer is limited based on their financing to receive the full amount of that credit, what that does is that means whatever amount is left over that they could not receive, it just goes back to the seller, and that's that. So the reason I like to touch on this is because if you're asking for closing costs, if you're asking for credits on repairs, if you're asking for an agent to kick in on something, we know there's a lot of different ways and scenarios in which a buyer may be credited for repairs or what have you. Make sure you are in tight communication with your lender. Is it acceptable to take on that credit without them hitting their limit, without it jeopardizing their loan in any way, shape, or form, as well as the timing of the credit? Will this cause a closing disclosure to have to be resent out? You know, just having really good communication with your team is key, because that's part of the contract and it's in there. The last thing we'd want to do is negotiate really hard for our buyer and get a great credit that's important to them, and they only get, I don't know, half of it. That would be a massive bummer, and you have no one else to blame but you. So that's J5. And then K, buyer stated financing. Now, this one's really key. I want to make sure people are clear on this. Essentially, what this reads is that the buyer, whatever financing they stated on the finance part of the contract, is the financing they're going to use to purchase this home. And any changes to that finance approach needs to be mutually agreed upon with buyer and seller. And a lot of people miss this. And this is a big problem, because a lot of times a buyer will not move forward with a conventional and switch to FHA for whatever reason, or there's some kind of issue going on, it's very explicit in this contract, and I want to make sure everyone's clear, that needs to not only be communicated, but agreed to by the seller. So Julio, anything in those two that you want to speak to at all?
Yeah, I'll jump on the one you just went with. But so, for example, for me, I found myself conflicted sometimes when I have a buyer who says, "Hey, we're selling our house and we might actually put more down." So, of course, the first person of myself wants to write in the more because I want to make my offer stronger. However, I've got to take that step back and go with their lower amount, because I don't think a seller is ever going to have a problem with us putting in more, as opposed to the opposite. So I find myself, whenever I get to this point of sending a little bit of an explanation with my email and with my offer, and just saying, "Hey, Mr. Listing Agent, I want you to know we're starting off the offer with 10% down, but chances are once we close on their sale of their home and they net more than they expected, they intend on using that funds to put more down." So it kind of gives them something to look forward to, so to speak, or again, just some more reassurance that things are moving along well. So
yeah, that's an important strategy. So spot on 100%. I navigate it the same way. If I have a client between 10 and 15%, like your example, I'll write it at 10%, and I'll also give explanation. Hey, just know this buyer at minimum is going to put 10% down. They may want to adjust it during escrow to be as much as 15% down, because I don't see a listing agent or a seller getting upset that the buyer is going to have a lower loan amount, put more down. But the opposite could be true, from 15 to 10%. So strategically, we're setting good expectations and putting ourselves in a position where if we have to change the financing, it should be an easy transition there.
Yeah. And if you're looking for the verbiage, it's right there, letter K. I highlighted it in my notes as I was preparing for tonight or today. And, seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than specified in the agreement. So sometimes I think and I know there's one coming up, the as is part, like sometimes we know what's in there, but we really don't know where it's at. And this is one of those ones where I would say, hey, highlight that spot right there so that you can use this moving forward.
So Julio, when we're dealing with a market where there's a lack of inventory like we're in right now, and we're starting to see some creativity with offers, this tends to be a section where I start to see some adjustments made. What are you seeing? What are you leveraging? I think this would be a good place to start with some of those injections.
I actually have a question for you too, but so for me, I'm starting to see, one, appraisals being removed, and two, everybody's starting already to move towards and I don't know if this has changed, but prior to, the COVID stay home order, there was a class I went to with Gov Hutchinson and told me that in fall, this loan contingency is moving to 17 days in the contract. So if that still stays, I'm seeing that already though. People are tightening up on that loan side because that's usually the one that they can, if the lender has really got all the documentation, and has them DU approved, so to speak. So that's what I'm seeing the most removing contingencies, appraisal contingency, and then tightening up the loan. And then if, again, the appraisal sometimes gets tightened up too, but those are probably the most that I'm seeing. I was going to ask you, because I had an agent do this on me, and I just wasn't sure how to react to this. He removed his appraisal contingency. Okay. And so obviously he had a loan. So I knew there still had to be an appraisal.
Sure.
So I asked him, like after he had removed contingencies and I knew our deal was pretty, but I asked him, I said, hey, just out of curiosity, what would happen if that appraisal didn't come in play, or didn't come in at value? Oh, I'd find another reason to cancel.
Yep.
Is his excuse. And it, initially it was like, that move, it's like, yeah, I know that, but that's just not cool. But at the same time, so I'm curious to know what your thoughts would be on being in that position.
Yeah, so that's exactly the one I wanted to make sure we hit on. So I'm seeing a lot of contingencies removed in advance. I will speak to my clients when I'm writing offers for them about ways in which they could be more attractive, but I'm always speaking to the realities of what happens, risk and reward, by making these adjustments, right? So yeah, I'm seeing that a lot. And as far as someone wanting to cancel for a different reason, here's what I'm going to tell our audience: be very careful of what you think you may be doing here. And here's why I want to explain this. So our real estate contracts for the most part are black and white, right? With the exception of the blue stuff that we can alter, right? Real estate law, when it plays out in litigation, is shades of gray. And I want to make sure people are really clear about that. We can have contractually exactly the way things are supposed to play out, and then you go to litigation or maybe even small claims court, and it doesn't always play out according to the black and white that we see in the contract. Okay, so there's still some objectivity involved here. One of the things that I want people to be careful of is, because a lot of times they think, well, as long as we have a contingency in place, we'll just call that contingency and move on. So one of them, for example, is if they remove the appraisal contingency but have the loan contingency in place, the appraisal doesn't come in and they go, oh, well, it's because I can't get a loan. Well, here's the problem. If the listing agent is smart enough, they'll go, well, I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do. Because there's an earnest money deposit at stake here, I need you to get with my preferred lender, and we need to understand if that's in fact the situation. So, you could be held to account for trying to maneuver and massage things that way. Julio and I both agree, and I think you have a really solid way in which you explain this, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to keep an earnest money deposit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do in California. But this is definitely one of those ways in which if it did go to mediation, arbitration, or small claims court, if someone can speak to the fact that someone mismanaged expectations not in good faith, that objectivity could kick in and you might be in a position where the buyer's losing earnest money deposit for that maneuvering. Yeah, that's my thought and opinion about it. Do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I completely agree. And just going back to what we started with, talking about that percentage and putting a cap. Sometimes you put your own foot in your mouth. You give them a call and, hey, I'm canceling because of the loan. Oh, really? What about? And the whole time I'm thinking as a ninja move, like, go ahead, please say that if the interest rate went up, and then and I know there's nothing on there that I've just referred to, like you said, well, let's go ahead and get them over to my lender, see what we can do. I got someone that's really creative, make it all sound positive. But the second they start backpedaling, they just find themselves in a hole because now they're trying to use a different excuse. And it's just like, I can really at that point then try to go to my seller, set their expectations that, we need to cancel this for facts that it's just going to be a headache if we don't do it sooner than later. But then I'm going back to the agent and I'm saying, hey, look, talk to my sellers. And, they're just not happy about this. And now I'm trying to work towards getting some of that deposit because they did technically just waste our time. So.
For sure. And trying to speak to some of the costs that were involved for the seller to be in this transaction and it not to proceed. Mm-hmm. And that's where you can come back to a buyer's agent and go, listen, I've got you over the barrel, but my seller is a reasonable person. These are their costs. So we need X amount of the earnest money deposit. We'll release the rest, but I need you to sign now. Yeah. So that way it allows both parties to walk away. Because as you guys know, the way it would play out otherwise is escrow is just going to sit there until you tell them what the mutually agreed upon decision is, or you're going to have to go to some type of litigation and get it figured out. Then they're instructed. Otherwise, escrow just sits around and says, you guys let me know what to do.
Yep.
Right.
Agreed.
Cool. Anything else on here before we move forward?
No.
Awesome. All right. So under 4B, this is super important. If the buyer needs to sell a home to purchase this property, you need to make sure you're checking the box, right? And then you also want to include the COP form, which you have on the bottom of the slide here. Now, some things about the COP form that are super important. Number one, at the bottom, I don't think I have it in here. I don't, and I apologize. But one of the things is there's a clause in the COP form that speaks to how long before the seller can make the buyer aware, give a notice to the buyer that they have a non-contingent offer. And the way that it's pre-written is the seller retains that right to immediately inform the buyer if they have a non-contingent offer, meaning your client. And if your client can't, number one, remove the contingency, and number two, simultaneously prove that they can buy the house without selling the previous home, then the seller, after 3 days of notice, can cancel that escrow and move forward with the new offer. So it's pre-written for that seller's right to be immediately in effect. Julio, I don't know about you, but one of the things I usually do is after conversation with my client, how far we're into the escrow, or if we're even under contract yet on their listing, or if their listing's not even up and running, we will make an adjustment to that term and provide them enough time within reason so that the seller cannot deliver that notice immediately, which basically locks us into a contract for a certain duration of time for my buyer to sell their property. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you, and you hit everything on the head. I've actually, and again, I know I've got to sometimes think about my client's best interest to get the offer accepted, but have found in my way of delivering an email with, effective communication, I'll check the box that says it's in play for the entire agreement. And then the way I work that back a little is in my email, I send like a copy of, a document or two that basically will show them I'm in escrow, share with them, hey, look, contingencies have been removed, or I give them that up to date, to that moment of me sending the offer, exactly where we're at, escrow information on that deal, whatever I can do to make them feel more comfortable, without crossing any lines, because my job again is to protect my client. And we all have stories, but I have one where, the day of closing, my client in the middle on selling and buying, decided to take a little leave from work. And when that VOE got called in, I had to cancel both transactions. And because I did that full agreement, till the end of the agreement, I was able to, put him in a good position, which was stay home. Yep. Felt bad for the other two agents and their clients, but, again, because I knew the contract enough, I did it that way, and it worked. So
good stuff. And then I'll also share with you guys that in this COP form, it very specifically says that if the buyer's property is in escrow or enters escrow, and either that escrow gives notice to cancel or the buyer's not able to perform, that this buyer needs to inform this seller that change in the transaction has happened. And I'm sure, Julio, you've seen this a million times. We're in an agreement like this on the listing side. And then because we're smart enough to keep tabs on that property, like put it on one of our saved searches as a concierge in the MLS where it's showing up at the front, I see it go active again. And then I'm making a phone call like, what in the world is going on? Because they tried to get away with not sharing this information.
Yes, agreed.
So just be cautious if you're entering into a contract like this on the buyer side and something goes south on that transaction. The contract states how you're supposed to perform. Let that person know. You're going to have a much better opportunity to try and keep that deal together by offering some solutions because of what happened, instead of trying to hide from it and sneak away with not telling them that. Because as soon as they find out, there's no more trust. There's no more likelihood they're going to want to deal with you anymore.
Yep.
One more little war story I want to share with you guys very briefly about the person who's selling a home and buying, okay? Because this happened to me once and it was really tough. So just follow along for a moment. So sold someone's home. We asked that buyer to give us a 60-day escrow so my clients can in turn go find a home to purchase, okay? About 5 days into that deal, my clients were able to write an offer on a home for 35 days, okay? So there's about a 20-day gap. Does that make sense? Now, the buyers of the home for my clients, the home that they're selling, they were able to close much faster. They just offered us that much time because that was our request to go out and look for a home. We successfully did that. Here's where I made a mistake. And I want to share this with you guys because it's something I failed to do and it bit me hard. When we went into that escrow on the home they were purchasing, I had a very thorough conversation with the other buyer for the home we're selling and said, we need you to close by this time. And everything was fine, good, ready to go. But I never amended the closing date. So fast forward to when we should be wrapping up the home sale so we can purchase the other house. This buyer's lender had some issues. And I actually was in very tight communication with that other agent. And I said, I'm going to have to send you a notice to perform so you guys can get going here. I'm going to have to send you a demand to close. Well, what happened is I went back to my original contract and realized we never amended the closing date. So basically, I can't send them a demand to close when their contract date is still, 20 more days. So it put my client in a serious bind. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is because if you go into escrow on a property that they're selling and you ask for an extended escrow, I get it. It's a smart strategy. It worked for us. When you go into contract another home that they're buying, you need to come back and tighten up all your dates and make sure you amend the closing dates accordingly. I just want to put it out there because that bit me once. Fortunately, it all worked out. But if everyone would have lost, my client, who was a seller and the buyer, would have been the one left holding the bag on both deals.
Yeah, man. It's
Cool.
good to learn from each other.
Yep. It's always fun. All right. So we're back to the residential purchase agreement. Down here, we're going to dive into allocation of costs. Okay. So one thing I'd like to point out really quick, obviously we normally ask for the seller to pay for the natural hazard disclosure, including environmental. I personally always leave it a seller's choice. Julio sometimes has a different take on that, and I'll let you speak to that in a moment.
Yeah, short and sweet. Okay.
Yo, go ahead, man. Go right ahead.
I was just gonna say short and sweet. Yeah, I mean, essentially, I want to give my my partnerships or my, let's call it, my affiliates, the people who support my business a lot, an opportunity to earn the business. And I think it goes without saying that there's just some agents on the listing side out there that don't pay attention to everything as well, and or they don't care. It's not a big deal for them. So I get my NHD person a credit. So yeah, that's how easy it is. So I always do put our preferred companies.
And I think that's a really smart strategy. The one thing that sometimes I will do a little different, even though I've really kind of taken on that mentality since we did this before, is if I know we're in a tight bind and there's a lot of offers and it's tough, I may just leave it default for seller to choose if I'm trying to not get countered and be in that mess.
Yeah.
But I really like that idea of trying to do a solid for our service providers because hey, this is a relationship business and loyalty goes a long way. If you can get away with it, everyone wins on your side of the equation. And then, of course, 7-2. This one's a big deal for me because this makes me want to pull my hair out. I get it. In the past, the residential purchase agreement used to state that if you're asking for the seller to pay for the wood destroying pest inspection, that you would have to tag if they're going to be paying for Section 1 or Section 2 or neither or the whole 9 yards. But this contract was adjusted for a reason. And the main reason was CAR essentially looked at the contract and decided, it's not fair that when it comes to a termite report, we're essentially asking the sellers to write a blank check because often these contracts are written before the inspection is completed. So there's no way to know for what the seller would be paying for, okay? Now, I know why that change was made. Furthermore, I also know how a lot of listing agents assume things because of the fact that people still leverage it the old way. So this is how I write my contracts. The way that I put it is, as you see, the seller to pay for a wood destroying pest inspection by any licensed company. You could put in your own there, but I usually put any licensed company. Now, listing agents often will look at this and assume, oh, great, they're not asking for termite repairs. And guess what? I have no problem that they made that assumption because this isn't the place to ask for it according to the way the contract was supposed to be written. So Julio, do you have anything to add on that?
And so I will add the difference in the way I write offers is I don't put the request for the termite. We've talked about this before, and I'm looking at it from, and again, maybe it's my buyer's pile, with them being FHA. I am looking to make use of that opportunity to do my own inspection with my own company during my inspection period. And then bring that to the table to my buyers. It helps me set my buyers' expectations a little bit too. I like being able to tell them, look, guys, we can do whatever inspections you want. And I kind of helps me exceed expectations by letting them know immediately, hey, I already set up a termite for you. I already set up a roof for you and, set up these other ones, and these are free, but you got to pay for the general inspection. And then, it kind of gives me that opportunity as well. But again, I don't write it on there, but you'd be surprised. I actually sometimes will get a response or I'll get a call from the agent saying like, oh, the seller's going to pay for termite. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'll add it in somehow. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. You're right. Some of the, more traditional, kind of thinking the old school ways, they'll come back as a pro and a con in this situation. And sometimes you get it included just because they're so set in their ways. And I'm okay with that in this situation. So, but I also do it, most importantly to me, is to try to help out with the loan side. If it's on there, and it's seen by the lender and underwriters at the very beginning, there's a good chance they're going to be asking for something later. So if I don't have it in there, then I have a report and it turns out it's $200 worth of stuff and I'm getting a credit towards closing costs to cover that, then I could just have my client sign a waiver. So I'm kind of looking at 3 steps ahead just in case. And that's another reason why I don't put it in there.
And this is why I love working with Julio on stuff like this, because I want everyone to know, understanding the contract on his level where you can see 2 and 3 steps ahead, this is how you win. On the listing side, when I get a contract written the way that I do it, but it's from an FHA buyer, I also help my sellers understand that if we accept it the way it is, and for most sellers it's customary, I want to make sure I'm setting expectations. As soon as that report gets distributed to the lender because it's showing up on the contract, you're pretty much going to be on the hook for the repairs. So even though it doesn't say you're going to pay for repairs, just know when it's FHA, VA, it's probably going to dictate that you do. Mm-hmm. Conventional may or may not. But in this dynamic, understanding it on both sides of the equations and setting good expectations with your clients can really be important. Really quick. So under B1, seller to pay for smoke alarm and carbon monoxide. Do you see anything important there, Julio?
I think it's important you guys know where they go, where they're supposed to be at. And, at the end of the day, be willing to always have a box in my car. So I'm always ready to install one no matter what side I'm on. So, very small thing to deal with.
And then before, when we did this, we didn't include B2, which is at the top of page 3 of the RPA. And that gets into the any mandatory government retrofit standards in the whole 9 yards. Are you seeing any changes there, Julio? Do you have any opinions about that?
No changes whatsoever. Still requesting for seller to pay in advance on my offers. Another one of those areas where, I usually get it countered out, which they usually counter back, which I'm fine with. But when it comes to getting the experience and knowing your areas like downtown LA or the city of LA, I had a listing right across the street from the water department, and they came in and said some requirements had to be done in order to sell the home. So, make sure you know where it is that you're buying and helping your clients out, and make sure that you find out some details from the local, facilities.
Yep. City of Azusa does the same. They have a city report that's required. And if you don't have your business license there, you're going to get tagged with a hefty fee. So just know whatever municipalities you're selling within, they do have some jurisdiction above and beyond what we normally do. So be mindful of that. When it comes to any like retrofit standards, Julio, have you come in any issues with that at all?
No.
I have not either. And I see a lot of listing agents countering that out because they're all worried about it. I've heard of war stories. I've never had any close to me or personal. I would just say that if you're, for whatever reason, buying a home in parts of LA, maybe old parts of Redlands where these homes are built in like late 1800s, early 1900s, where building standards were dramatically different. Maybe it's something you're cognizant of, but I haven't seen it at all in my career anyway. I'd be curious to know if any of you agents who are on have had any issue with that. Type it in the chat box. We may not be able to address it, but we'd love to hear, and maybe we can speak to it tomorrow. Let's get into some of the title and escrow stuff. So I'm going to let you take over here, Julio, because this is where you shine.
Oh, no. It's definitely a part that I love. That's the thing. We're passionate about this job and career in so many ways. And this is something I do. Again, going back to my relationships, we're always writing in our escrow company, always writing in our title company. For those of you guys who are building our relationships, this is one great way to be able to go back and show your fellow companions that, hey, look, I'm really trying to get some deals, especially when you're new, because you're going to need those booties when you have your open house, what's it called? To cover the shoes, the booties to cover the shoes when you're having open houses. And you're going to need, some, perhaps maybe some items to kind of give away. And, you don't want to be going to your title reps and your escrow officers for all these favors when you're not really putting in any efforts on your end. So for me, I definitely always check the boxes about, both each to pay their own. And I always put in the escrow company that I'm looking to work with. And at the same time, putting in the seller to pay for title and putting in my title rep. And I have been told by multiple title reps that even if you write them in on the initial RPA and you get countered back with a different rep at the same company within their own setup, they have a way to still get a credit for one side. So if my rep sees and I'm able to show them the contract in advance, it's awesome to know that, hey, they still get their half credit. And again, I'm not worried about how many credits or anything like that, but point being is it's just one more way to tighten up that relationship with my title rep. So definitely sticking with that. And then you want me to go ahead and jump down to the home warranty area?
Go for it, bud.
Yeah. So then with home warranty, guys, same thing. You know, a lot of times we're choosing seller's choice. And I think when I see that on the listing side, I kind of feel like, okay, maybe I'll look up the numbers of the agent if I got a minute or two, just to kind of see, is this more of a new to the game kind of thing, or they just haven't built the relationships. But I'm thinking that, man, again, I remember being a new agent. I want to learn all about these other people's, vendors' jobs, and how important is home warranty to my client, and when can it really play a big part. And I tell both my clients, seller and buyer, how important it could be to them. And the way I kind of roll that off on the seller side is letting them know, hey, look, by paying for this home warranty, we're likely going to save us a phone call 2 months, 3 months later from the listing agent or the seller trying to get a hold of you, because they just assume that you knew something was not working, and that's not the case. It's just, it's time. It's like when we buy a car, the next day something, the remote goes out, or the window doesn't go down. It's time. And so I like to ask for the home warranty. I like to put in my rep, and I like to go all out too. I mean, this is $725 on this example. With the pool, it goes up to $920, and every time I get, a counter in most cases, and then sometimes I don't. But when I do, again, just putting my own personal business out there, I pay for the difference for my client on the buyer side all the time. I want that roof coverage. For those of you who don't know, a little plug for American Home Shield. I use them, and reason being is for $150, usually on the seller side, that ends up paying for it, you actually get a 1-year roof certification with it. They come out, do the inspection during your inspection period, and then they essentially, give your client $5,000 worth of coverage for that next year. So I throw the book at this, and I ask for everything I can. And again, if I get it countered, if my, commission and I haven't done anything else already on behalf of my client, I'll pay that difference to make sure they get it. So again, these are areas where all my template has it in there already. That's how much I do it. So
when I heard this the first time from you, Julio, I thought it was so brilliant that I actually switched to American Home Shield with Lisa Cowett.
Okay.
Because when you explain it, you're actually positioning the buyer to get a roofer to go out there and actually do a roof inspection as a value add. And then you even mentioned sometimes you'll negotiate based on the findings from that roofer going out there. I think it's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. It's a massive value add for your clients. When people think about buying a home and they think of the most important aspects of a property in terms of the quality of the home, making sure the roof is sound is a massive thing for most people. This is a great way to make sure it's a party to the contract without maybe even the listing agent understanding what this is going to entail during the process. So brilliant there.
Yeah.
Okay. One other thing I'm going to speak to before we move on is D7. I always put this in here, seller to pay for any private transfer fee if it applies. If you don't type in if applicable, you'll probably get a counter. And I try to avoid counters because if I can get my client's offer accepted clean, that's my focus. So just make sure that you put the if applicable if you're going to tag that in there.
Yep.
Anything else on this, Julio?
No, don't forget to check the HOA boxes if there's an HOA.
Absolutely, man.
One of my fellow agents didn't, and he ended up having to pay for them. So it happens.
It does. Absolutely. All right, moving on. Included and excluded items. Now I'm going to kind of let you take over again on this one because I love your approach here.
Sure. Again, goes with about just putting it out there and seeing if the agents miss it. I've taken 3 refrigerators from the same agent. How about that? I check all the boxes unless I see that it's not included. Then obviously I don't want to try throwing one by them. But if I see it's absolutely not included, they took the time to put it in the not included area of the MLS, then I don't. But I always check the boxes for our stove, washer and dryer, and refrigerator. And then I also set the expectations with my buyer. Hey, I'm doing this, but even if it's accepted, don't cash in on it. I want to wait till we close and say it's there, because that's where I usually find out that the agent and or the seller weren't aware of this, and it's gone when we go do the final walkthrough a few days before closing. Then I got to work out a credit or something, but I've already set that expectations with my clients that don't expect it. Could have been a mistake, but something's going to be worked out for you at the end. You know what I mean? So that's definitely an area that I definitely enjoy. And the other thing underneath this that we don't have highlighted, but one thing that I've come to play quite a few times is the ring now, the ring on your door.
Yep.
So knowing that that's included, guys, if you read the four, for number 4, right, is where I'm looking at. Where is it at? No, actually, it's number 8B. 8B, yeah, I'm sorry, item is excluded. And right below that, number 4, there's existing integrated phone and home automation systems. And right under that, other than phone, there's a box to check or not included in that paragraph. And I had somebody take a couple rings a couple times and let them know, like, hey, nope, it's included. It shows it right here. So definitely an area to make sure you've checked your boxes right and making sure you're doing your best you can for your client.
And on the listing side, if you see that your client has a Ring doorbell, make sure that they're clear that most contracts are going to be written so that the Ring is included. If they have issue with that, say, great, put in the old doorbell before we get your listing active. So just understanding this contract on both sides of the equation can be massively important. One other thing I want to mention, when we're thinking about how the market's different right now, if you see that a refrigerator is excluded, but you didn't bother looking that up in the MLS and you put it on here, that's one more reason to get a counter offer. And that could, really change the power of your offer without realizing it. Diving down into C, because I think this one is really important and a lot of people don't realize how this works. Brackets attached to walls, we have it highlighted. Floors or ceilings for any such component, furniture, or item shall remain with the property, or if checked, will be removed, and holes or other damage shall be repaired, but not necessarily painted. This is crucial. You have to make sure that you're clear that if there's a TV hung in the living room, that bracket's supposed to stay. If you want the bracket gone, you can check the box and they'll patch it up. And if they sign off on the contract that way, they have an obligation to do according to the contract, right? So I just like to make sure that's crystal clear. I've gotten a safe out of this part of the contract. Actually, I think I've gotten 2 safes out of it now, one on my own home, and a couple of other items that were like permanently attached, not just like hung up on a wall. So making sure that you're clear how these things work can really play out to your advantage or disadvantage if you're not crystal clear. Hey, we're 3 minutes before the top of the hour.
Yep.
Would this be a good place to wrap for today, Julio, or is there anything else you want to dive into before we end for today's session?
Yeah, I think this is a great spot. And coincidentally, I think when we first had our first talk, we said we'll probably get through the first 3 pages, and that was about it. So yeah, I think it's a great spot. Where I'm open for staying on a few more minutes if we want to do any kind of, if there's any opportunity or any questions.
Yeah, so we can cover what we've already addressed.
And then that way those who want to get off of the video, they can. But those who want to ask a couple questions, if any, if not, John, anything to jump in and add about what you heard and maybe perhaps some highlights or takeaways for you?
And before anyone jumps off, John, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure people are aware. Tomorrow we're going to keep going, same time, another hour, and we're going to try and integrate some additional items when it comes to the coronavirus addenda that have been included. So just in case anyone jumps off, I want you guys to know what tomorrow's going to look like. So be back on here. Sorry about that, John.
Yes. No worries. So yeah, I do have a couple questions here. One of them is from Naeem Olechea. What's happening, Naeem, from the Associates Realty Group. And he was saying that he had received, he said, I got a counter from a listing agent asking him to exclude 7B2 in the Fontana area. I guess that's more so just of a acknowledgement or just kind of sharing, because I think, Joe, you had mentioned if it was going to be out in the older parts maybe of LA and or Redlands. So that's just an acknowledgement there. I did get another message that was texted on over to me that I thought was a great one. In Section K, we had talked about if the loan program changed, that the client then the seller needs to be informed. We got to let that realtor know. What if the loan officer and company that you originally sent on over the pre-approval letter with, and that lender picked up the phone and called the listing agent? Is that a problem, or kind of what sort of issues does that create? But if it's the same loan program, same down payment and everything.
That's an interesting question. So I will state that because, and this is just going to be best practice, I'd have to dig in deeper to figure out how that could play out litigation wise. That's usually how I try to understand how to navigate. Again, scales of gray. Okay. So when I can understand how it plays out 2 and 3 steps further is how I'm going to base managing that. If you're going to change lenders, even if it's the same loan officer, but they brokered it to a different bank, you got to make sure that you're telling that listing agent, and that escrow company, because if you don't, it's going to be found out at some point. And again, you lose all credibility. And you could be moving timelines along. So I'm sure Julio would agree with this. Use ETAs. Just because we agreed to something up front, things happen in a transaction. As long as we can get the buy-in from all the necessary parties, we can extend things without having to go and hide and wish for the best, right? Like we should be able to navigate these things a little bit better than that. So usually my mode of communication is to be ahead of it. Make sure it's something that's addressed well before anyone feels like it's a concern, because that's when you're going to have the most buy-in for agreement and have adjustments made to the contract. Yeah. That's not always possible. Sometimes it's last minute, right, Julio? And things go sideways, and there could be different strategies in that dynamic. But, if it's early on and there's some adjustments made, like, hey, they want to go with this different loan officer because this loan officer locked them in with a better deal, or they have a different program that's going to be amazing, have that communication. Make sure you provide those details as to why it's not going to be a massive hindrance on the deal. And if there needs to be some adjustment to extensions of timeframes for removal of contingencies or closing, that's the time to get that squared away early before anyone's concerned about it. Julio, by all means.
Yeah, and I'd like to use this opportunity to actually take it now to the part about the buyer consultation. This, to me, is a great opportunity to, especially those buyers who are calling you up, hey, can I see this property today? Oh, okay, great. Are you looking to buy with a cash or with a loan? A loan. Are you pre-approved? No. And then this is where another one of those things where I will tell them within my buyer consultation, like, hey guys, I don't mind showing you this 1 or 2 home or at the first viewing, and let them know the importance of selecting a lender and getting that under, that DU ASAP, not only for the viewing process, but why? Because what are we going to do? We're going to fall in love with the home. We're going to write an offer today, and you're going to open escrow tomorrow. And if we don't got that figured out, we're starting off on the wrong foot here. So again, for those of you guys who are working the buyer side right now and you get that call, this is a great opportunity for you to share the importance in advance so that you can ultimately get that approval letter done. So you're not out there showing homes to a buyer who's not fully approved. And at the same time, you're setting that expectations that, hey, if you're thinking about shopping the loan, do it sort of now, and, and give them that scenario about rates and how they can't promise anything up front until you're set into escrow. So I love to use this as leverage with my clients, and I mean that in a positive way where I'm trying to help set their expectations and keep them on the right path in advance. So
speaking of a buyer's consultation, I've got 2 thoughts on that. Well, number one is buyer's consultation is also a great opportunity to make sure that buyers are clear that you don't shop for your mortgage broker based on an interest rate, because anyone can promise you whatever, and there's no commitment until you're in escrow, as Julio already said. So what I try and help my buyers understand through their consultation is you need someone who understands how to perform for you as a buyer, and not all lenders are built the same way. Refinance lenders, and if that's their main focus, they may not understand the nuance of managing a purchase in a way that could harm you. So you got to make sure that your lender is crystal clear about that. That's why I always offer a couple of recommendations to them. So that's one thing that I want to cover. The second thing I have a thought on is, and I'd love to hear any feedback if you guys want to type it in. What if Julio and I at a later time came together and did our buyer consultations kind of one against the other, not in a competition setting, but just to share more ideas? Because one thing I'll mention is that buyer consultations are so dramatically important. If you're dealing with a bunch of listings and you have several buyers, one of the most ways to remain efficient in your business is to help them understand this contract before you even look at a house. Because now you can be out there making good, quick decisions because they're already clear. They know how to navigate things on the buyer side. It could be a really powerful thing. So sorry, I just want to throw that in there.
No, I got to add, and then it saves you from them going into new construction without you, because that's part of the buyer consultation too.
Amen.
And you would be so upset at yourself or them.
I got another question, guys, in regards to the COP form, and it's kind of 2-part.
Okay.
So Joe, when you were talking about the transaction where you had asked for a 60-day escrow,
Yep.
did you need to include any specific verbiage so that way you could come back to the buyer of your property and then ask for them to close within a reasonable time? Because what if you're already in escrow and then you ask them, hey guys, can you close earlier? Because I'm going to close mine earlier. And then they say no. So how did you safeguard yourself there?
Yeah, we actually did that at the time of contract. We had some pretty clear communication, and we did an on or before in their purchase agreement for their 60-day escrow was on or before. The problem is I couldn't force them into an earlier because they had up to that 60-day mark. So in a dynamic like that, you can do an on or before, so that way you can have that communication and make sure everyone's clear we can make an adjustment. And quite frankly, you could even have a tighter addendum now. You know, again, this was when I made that mistake where, you know, you can kind of spell out that buyer and seller agree to an earlier closing date once seller enters into a contract on a home to purchase. So that way you can document the verbal agreement of being fluid. That's completely reasonable. There again, my biggest thing is, you know, just make sure that once you get all the dates ironed out from the sale to the purchase, you reverse engineer and make sure everything's documented accordingly.
Okay, then I got another question in regards for what Julio had mentioned on the COP form. If you could just clarify, and then this is the last question I have on my end. Julio, you had made mention something along the lines of you having a certain number of days where somebody was able to secure the buyer up until the end of the agreement. And so we just asked if we can get some clarification in regards to that.
Yes, unfortunately, we don't have it had it up on the screen, but at the bottom of that page, there is a opportunity to select the box of having the agreement or having the COP, the contingency in play the entire agreement. So that's a box all the way towards the bottom. And yeah, it basically gives my client the okay. And obviously the opposite party is agreeing to the fact that they're okay with us having this all the way through the entire process. And with having that, again, that's a big ask. I mean, you know, it's a big ask. And for anybody to agree to that is, you know, ultimately giving you a great opportunity. I don't go into an escrow trying to cancel. So the goal is not to cancel. But in the event of a scenario like what I had, you know, it worked in my favor.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that very briefly. So and I apologize, I didn't have it on the bottom of this because I don't think we spoke to it that last time we did it. So my apologies. Maybe we'll bring it up for tomorrow as well. But the way it's pre-written is that the seller retains this immediate right to notify the buyer of a non-contingent offer. And that official notification starts the clock on a 3-day period where thereafter, if the buyer can't remove that contingency and at the same time prove that they can buy the home without selling that property, then it puts the seller in a position to cancel that escrow and move forward with this other non-contingent buyer. Non-contingent being the key. So if a seller gets another contingent offer, they can't use this portion of the contract, okay? But that's how it's pre-written. Right below it says, or if you check the box, there can be a delayed notification. And it says how many days. And at the very end of that paragraph, what Julio's saying, he likes to check the box where it finally says, or during the entire duration of this agreement. That's where, so I'll give you my perspective on it. Julio's right. You're asking for a lot from the seller on checking that last box. My opinion is the seller's asking a lot for that buyer with it unchecked in any way where they can immediately get told, you know, think about this. Your buyer pays for a home inspection, does an appraisal, and then maybe thereafter gets a notice, hey, in 3 days, we want to move forward with some other buyer because we can. I think that it's reasonable to check that middle one for certain and find an agreeable time frame. But if you can get away with them taking it for the whole agreement, by all means, why wouldn't you protect your buyer?
Yeah. And unfortunately, well, let me say this first. Fortunately, this is why we're doing this exact thing right here. Because a lot of people right now are probably thinking this is so boring, but this is the part of our business. If you don't know this foundation, you know, you get yourself in a position like that and you don't know what to do. And then unfortunately is what I was going to say is you go into these escrows sometimes and you have to make a decision as an experienced agent. am I going to take advantage of this person when I start noticing that there's, some things that they're not catching? Or am I going to educate this person? And I find myself educating, every time because I want them to know. But of course, you've always got your client's best interest in mind. And when things are accepted that at the end of the day, it's going to have your client's best interest in mind, you refrain from sharing everything up front until after. Just like I asked that guy after we were already going to close, what would he have done if the appraisal didn't come in at that time? Because I want to hear if they're knowing why they're doing the things they're doing. And if they're not, at that time, I would have educated him. I would have said, hey, this is something you should look out for in the future. It may not be a deal with me. And, that guy may not, may take you to the hole with that. So.
And then I would want to remember that for the next time I receive his offer with that appraisal removed. I might go, last time we did this, it wasn't necessarily in good faith.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take that into consideration. And then I want everyone to understand, because I think a lot of times Julio's right. Like a lot of times we talk about contracts, people feel like, oh, that's like your normal board conversations, like you go to the board and listen to this boring stuff about contracts and who cares? No, actually, this is the highest level of negotiation, because we're not playing checkers, we're playing chess.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think about negotiation being this phone call or this upfront meeting where me and Julio are going to battle it out, man. And like whoever came with the best one-liner wins. Wrong. That's not good negotiation. Good negotiation is a process. You, like a boxer, do footwork to get people to move the way that you want them to. And when you understand a contract better, there is no negotiation to be had. They already signed off on it. So yes. I think like this is the highest level of negotiating, when you understand these things well enough to start playing chess and stop playing checkers.
Agreed.
All right, gentlemen, I would say for the sake of time, let's go ahead and we will wrap up. And then if you want to add any additional points that were discussed today and or that are on the agenda for tomorrow, then feel free, Joe, if you don't mind, shoot me on over a copy of what we have here. We do have some people that have requested to get a copy of the RPA with the highlights, just because it's easier for them to reference. So if you guys are okay with that, send it on over. We have the list of everybody who's attended and who's joined us on Facebook as well. And we'll make sure everybody gets that. And then for all of you, I would say to join us tomorrow for part 2. And this is going to, again, be at 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And I just want to thank the two of you for taking the time to jump on this call. Because if we really think about it, I mean, there's not too many agents that assume the responsibility or even embrace it to just empower the overall community. And so I say that with total sincerity. You guys know that I mean what I say, and I thank you sincerely for that. We'll go ahead and conclude this here, and then if you guys want to connect offline, any of you, feel free to leave your comments in the Facebook messages. We'll be able to respond, and I know Joe and Julio will take a look at them as well. And thank you very much, guys, for those who are acknowledging and just saying like, hey, you guys did a great job. People are already sending messages about that, so thank you to the two of you.
No worries. Thank you.
Pleasure. Be safe. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you, John.
All right, gentlemen.
Have a good night.